Bismillah,
This,
walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. So, as we mentioned, the book it consists of these, or it is structured on these seven topics: the conditions of the salah, or the shurut, the obligations of the salah, or the fara'id, the sunan of the salah, and the fada'il, which is a lesser degree of the sunan. And then it goes into that which is disliked and that which makes it invalid. In reality, this section, those things which invalidate the salah al-mufsidat, is the counter of this. Those things which are the condition of the salah and those things which are our obligation. Because if these things are not in place, your salah is invalid. So knowing these things, the conditions and the obligations, is what makes the salah sound. When the conditions or the obligations are not in place, then the salah is considered invalid. Any commentary on that or thoughts? Or is that point clear?
um, I was wondering if we were gonna go over the way to do the sajda saw.
Yeah, but that's not part of the topic right now. Because
Okay.
that's the last topic in the book. Right now, I'm only asking with regard to this point that I just made. The conditions and the obligations, those are necessary to be in place. If any of those things is out of whack, then we come to this category. The salah is invalid, or there's something that happened which invalidates the salah. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Yeah. As far as the sajda sahwi, that's a topic in itself, right? We're gonna cover that, but that's not where we're at right now. We're going over the structure of the book, and we're going over two of the most important issues that you have to confront. What makes your salah sound, and what constitutes salah, and what makes it invalid? The sajda sahwi the sajda sahwi is a different topic. Why? Because the sajda sahwi, it pertains to the sunan primarily. It pertains to the sunan. So when you miss a sunnah, and listen to what I said, it pertains to the sunan primarily, right?
Okay.
And what that means is that, and there's debate points. If you miss two sunan, what's the number of sunan that you have to miss in order for you sajda sahwi to be activated?
Yeah.
Okay, that's one thing. The other issue that comes up with sajda sahwi is that if you miss one of the obligations, okay, if you miss one, that's why I was trying to leave it out. But it finishes the chart. Wh- it- I'm trying to go over the logic here, not the details. So if you miss one of the obligations, you will always have to do that obligation. Sajda
Oh.
sahu will never cover your obligation. You do sajda sahu, like say for instance, if you miss the ruku', when you when you do ruku' is when you're going down into the bowing posture. You
Mm.
recite Quran as an example in a rak'ah. After you recite Quran, you go down into a bowing posture. If you miss that bowing posture, you can't not make sajda sahu. and think your salah is corrected. Some people they have that misunderstanding. That's why I mentioned
Yeah,
that. They think
yeah,
sajda sahu can cover an obligatory action. It can never cover an obligatory action. If you miss Surah Al-Fatiha in every school except the Hanafi school, your salah is invalid. And in this system, your salah is invalid. Sajda sahu is not going to cover you. You see what I'm saying?
yeah,
But if you like where this is tricky at is that if you miss an obligatory action, like for instance, going into ruku' or bowing, like we said, and then you say, "Oh, subhanallah, I missed it." So then there's no other way other than to come back up and do it. Maybe you may repeat the rak'ah over again. So then once you do that, once you bring in the acts that you were missing, once you bring in the action that was deficient, then you do such the sahu after, right?
yeah.
You two get the reality. Sajda sahu with an obligatory. If you miss an obligatory action, you have you have to do the obligatory action and sajda sahu. But sajda sahu by itself will not correct the fact that you miss something which is an obligation.
Jazakallah khair.
Is that clear or not?
Yeah, 'cause I was praying the other day and
But we're not even. This is not even the details of sajda sahu. That's what I'm trying to. That's why I'm saying like that's a different topic. What I'm trying to get you to understand is how these things, what is the structure of the book here, how these things interrelate to one another. Because you're not going to, that's nobody's going to tell you that. It's not going to be like you have to, with time, you have to learn. That's fortunate the way that we write these books or the way these books have been written. They're written in a way to kind of simplify and but there's things that are missing, like the interrelatedness between things, how to make sense of it. That only comes from the teacher sometimes. I haven't seen too many books that deal with the internal logic. It may not make sense what I'm saying, but if
no,
it
it makes
doesn't, if
sense.
it doesn't, just say it doesn't make sense.
There's certain things that have to be met in order for the salah to be um accepted.
No, but that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I'm showing you the interrelatedness between these topics. That's what I'm saying. So that's why I'm drawing these lines like this, right? I'm showing the interrelatedness. Let me close out this other screen because it's not going to do anything for me or for you all. So let me just focus on this notability. Let's go back now because I made a coloring book out of this. Okay, these two issues, the condition of the salah and the obligations of the salah, they also relate to that which makes the salah invalid. How so? If one of the conditions is missing, or if one of the obligations is missing, the salah is invalid.
Hmm.
So if you want to know what invalidates the salah, you study the conditions and the obligations. What invalidates the salah, right, is not having one of these things in place, not having one of these things in place. So it's the opposites, in other words.
Right.
We're good with that. That's clear.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The fada'il and the sunan, right? They're related to each other, but they're different degrees. It's, they're related to each other, but they're different degrees. It's just basically what we're saying is those acts which should be done, those acts like the sunan are those acts which were done with more frequency at this point. And the fadail are those acts which if you do them, you it's like if you clean your room, you cleaned it down, you organized everything, right? And then you come in and you add on perfume, air freshener. Then you come in, you add on some lights, nicer lights. That's how it is. It was satisfactory when you clean the room and you organize everything, right? You clean the room, consider that an obligation, right? But is that enough? Now you organized it, consider that like the sunan. You added air freshener and you added a nice light. That's the fada'il. You beautify it, take it to the next level. When you're having a busy day and so on and so forth, or a busy week, the only thing you need is a clean room to function at the really basic level. But it's probably going to drive you mad. So you're going to have your stuff organized if you want to function properly, right? Or else you're just going to start having issues. But if you want to chill and lamp out, now you add on your put on your incense, you put on your lights. That you that's how the fadail is. There's levels. There's levels to how we categorize actions, so that the only end game in all of this is to know what makes the salah sound, what perfects it, what makes it unsound. That's the whole game plan here. It's not that complicated. But this type of kind of like organizational structure, like this is how, like what comes under all of these themes is ayat of the Quran, ahadith, and the understanding of the people of knowledge. None of this stuff like this, with this level of organization, detailed labeling like this, it existed in the time period of the companions, as distinct as it does with the later day scholars. At the time of the companions, they had some understanding of it, but it was not labeled, it was not uh, categorized, classified in the way that the later scholars did. It's not a bid'ah. It became a necessity because of more questions that came in. Like for instance, Ali is like, "Well, I did salah and I did sajda sahu, and I wasn't sure how to do it." So now the question comes in: How do I teach sajda sahu? So then the scholar will come and create a system to teach, and of course, that had to be rooted in evidences. Somebody else comes and asks the question, says, "I did this in salah,"
Mm-hmm.
and then they say, "Oof, well, you shouldn't really do that in salah." we have these evidences. So that becomes unclassified and those things which are disliked. Somebody comes and says, what is it that I have, what is it that has to be done? And what makes the salah obligatory on me? It's like this little young boy that I was talking to in the masjid a few weeks back. I said, "You're not gonna come and pray." He says, "Yeah. It's not an obligation for me to pray yet." He's just like, it's true. He's not puberty, but but he knew, and he knew. Not an
Wow.
obligation. I don't have to pray yet. So it's like, so that's where that whole stuff comes from. All this type of structuring and all that. It comes from giving us the power to be able to have an understanding of what is it I have to do with this action, the act of salah, and the different components of it for it to be considered sound. Does that make sense or no?
Yeah.
Resto, you with us?
I'm right here. Makes sense.
Okay, so we covered this yesterday, not yesterday, last session, that the salah consists of actions, words, and those things which don't fall in either category, neither words, neither actions. So
The neither word, neither act.
the salah consists of actions, consists of words, and those things that don't fall in any category.
The things that are not either word or action, could those be
We're not
for?
going into any details. We're gonna get those details. We need the structure to be in your mind. Then what'll happen is you'll be like, there's this many actions, there's this many words, there's this many things that don't fall under actions or words. You have the framework, then you fill in the blanks with the details. But the framework has to be in place. That's why I'm not mixing it up. That's why I'm not using the book right now. Because I want you to have the framework in place. I took this out of the book. This is directly out of the book. But the book is going to add details. I just want you, when you think of Salah, right? This is what I want. This is what I want. Salah. You think of Salah. Are you with me?
Yeah.
Yep.
You say Salah has actions. Salah has words. Salah has those things which neither, is NA, not applicable to words or actions. That is the structure of Salah.
Mm-hmm.
This is the structure of the books of the book. This is the structure of the book. The topics that are dealt with in the book. This goes more specifically to Salah. All of these things pertain to Salah here, no doubt. But here in this context, we're talking about the topics of the book overall. We're talking about the book. Now, when we zoom in and we talk about Salah, when we go into the details of what's going on in the book, Now we're coming to a detailed point. Salah. How do we look at Salah? Salah. When we zoom out, we realize that the underlying structure, the skeleton of Salah, so to speak, consists of actions, words, and things that are neither actions and neither words. Are we good with that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, the bigger topic is going to be now this issue of those conditions. Remember, now we're going coming back to this, the structurable conditions, this area right here. So
Sure.
the shurut is the plural of shart. Shart. Shin ra ta. Shart. It means condition. Shurut means conditions. It's plural. So there's two types of conditions. This is one type, and this is another type. The first type is shurut al-wujub. Those things which make the salah an obligation. And then there's shurut al-siha. It's siha. Those things which allow you to know if the salah is considered to be sound. And there's 5 in each. The difference between these two is in the statement لا خطاب إلا بوجود هذا شرط ولسنا مكلفين باكتسابه. So in this section here, that there's no, in other words, you're not obligated to perform the salah unless these conditions are met. And we're not responsible for ensuring that they are met. There's no salah in this case. There's no obligation to perform the salah unless these conditions are met. That's one point. Second point, we're not responsible for those conditions to be met. Does that make sense or no?
Yep.
Okay, so let's shut this down now.
And we're not responsible.
So this is shurut al-wujub. Conditions of obligation. I'm just gonna shorten it right there. Conditions of obligation. As for the prerequisites of the obligation, the conditions of obligation, they are 5. The first is Islam. Now, in that regard, there's some question marks with how it is that the scholars talk about the conditions of obligations. They say that we're not responsible for it. But in Islam, we are called to Islam. Even if we're born Muslim, even if we're born to a Muslim family, we're still called to Islam. Because Islam is not by inheritance. Islam is by commitment. We could be born in a Muslim family, we can learn the ways of Islam, but we're still obligated to believe. We're obligated to move on knowledge. It's not just we just go with the flow. That has been a major problem in the Muslim Ummah in the later days. That people think Islam is just by inheritance. Or people think Islam is just by I took my Shahada and that's it. I was not Muslim. I took my Shahada. They don't think that I have to learn, I have to commit, I have to strengthen my belief. That's not the case. people are born into Islam and they're like, well, I'm Muslim, you know, uh, but they think they know Islam, but both groups, those born Muslim, those that convert to Islam, they need we need reform. That's just the reality of the at the end of the day. It's like we think we know, but we don't know. You know what I'm saying? Some people do from both camps. Some people do. Knowing also is not enough. And knowledge in Islam is knowing and practicing. It's not philosophy. It's not something that you just. Well, I shouldn't even belittle philosophy in that way. It's not something that's intellectual because the true sense of philosophy, it is a person that, uh, you know, pursues truth and wisdom, and they live by it. That's the true meaning of philosophy. But sometimes philosophy is belittled. But intellectualism is where everything is just in our heads, like we're behind the computer screen or something like that, and we're observing and learning facts, but our bodies are disengaged. And that's the same thing. It's like, having some knowledge of facts and knowing how to put those things into practice are, there's a gap here between those two realms, although they're interrelated. So having knowledge of Islam is not enough. Living Islam is really the reality of the knowledge. That's really when we can see that the person is at a high rank. In any event, in order for the salat to be an obligation, person has to be a Muslim. That's in one understanding. In the Maliki school, even the non-Muslims are obligated because of the issue of everyone is obligated by Allah to make the salah. And the proof that they have is that on the day of Yawm al-Qiyamah, they'll say, "Lam nakum min al-musallin." That we were not from among those who pray. So the Maliki school in that regard, uh, and the Hanbali school to a certain extent, but mostly the Hanbali school doesn't look at that. They don't differentiate between the Muslim and the non-Muslim when it comes to the practice of the deen. Everybody's obligated. Just one group is practicing, the other group is not practicing. That's not the standard position among the other scholars. If they don't have shahada, then they're not obligated to practice. There's details on that. I don't want to go into that, but I just want you to be exposed to that. Aside from the issue of being Muslim, everything else that comes, there's no way for us to make any effort really to realize or to actuate or to acquire these things. It should maturity. He translated it as maturity when really it's straight up puberty. That one of the obligations of the salat is that the male or the female reached puberty. And once they reach bulug or puberty, then that's one of the conditions of obligation. In other words, simply put, in order to be obligated for salat, you have to be a Muslim. You have to have reached the state of puberty. The third is in possession of intellect or aql, not just reason. It's not a good translation, which is the third category. Possession of aql, it means that a person is not, like if a person is in a coma, then that person is not obligated to pray the salah. There's debates among the ulama if a person is intoxicated on alcohol, that they're still obligated. And we can extend that ruling by analogy to heroin and other drugs and so on and so forth. But if a person is sleeping, a person at that point in time is not obligated to pray because they're not of mind, right? So a coma, sleeping, those things those things excuse the person from salah. But being intoxicated, being high, That does not excuse the person from salah. The fourth
Real,
is that
real quickly, I'm
yeah,
sorry about you.
no,
Um,
no, it's no bother.
for for the third one you have there, intellect. Can we also like use sound mind? Is that a good way
Oh,
for our
that's
notes?
good, very good. But that's a third. You're right. It's third. That's a third point. I knew that I was missing something, but my mind was the disc was skipping, so to speak. My brain wasn't on point. If a person uh if a person acquires the state of insanity, right? If a person becomes insane temporarily or permanently, then that person is not obligated. So for the category, it should read for possession of intellect that a person is conscious, that a person is of sound mind. That's a better framework, better way of saying it. Possession of intellect means that a person is conscious, a person is of sound mind. That's clear.
Yes.
So the fourth thing that obligates to salah, it pertains to a woman, that she's not on her menstrual cycle, that she's not in the state of postpartum bleeding. The menstrual cycle has some details because a woman could be bleeding and still praying, but there's a certain, I don't want to go into those details right now. There's a certain amount of time, like say if a menstrual cycle goes beyond a certain number of days, then that's no longer considered a menstrual cycle. It's considered blood that is from sickness, so she can pray during that time. The fifth thing which obligates the salah, and this pertains to both men and women, is not exclusive to women, is the entry of the time of the salah. There's details to that as well. But these are the five things, like we don't make the time come. Uh we don't, even though with medicine nowadays you can remove the menstrual cycle, but still the natural biological state is that there's a menstrual cycle in women for the most part until late age kicks in. But in other words, we don't. There's something beyond us. It's part of the biological flow. The same thing with the time of Salah. We don't determine where the sun is at, where the moon is at. The same thing with being possessed, of intellect, being conscious in the state of consciousness, or of sound mind. Those things are not 100% within our control. Particularly number one, which is being conscious. Because if you fall into a coma, you don't, there's not much that you can do with that. If you are asleep, there's not much that you can do with that. If you went crazy, you know, after you go crazy, it's not that easy to manage that. And I'm using loose terminology here. But can you take care of your mental health? Yes. Yes, you can take care of you. Can you prevent certain things, being exposed to certain things that may flip you out? I'm trying to use clear language rather than get into technicality. Simple language. Can you expose yourself to things which will traumatize you? Yes. Can you expose yourself to things which will destroy your intellect? Yes, you can. See what I'm saying? You can do that. So
So real quick,
nowadays, a woman can ingest a pill and she won't have a menses.
so that's still so that's still so that doesn't invalidate her prayer because she could take this pill and adjust the menses.
At face value, no. At face value, no, because she's there's no blood. We don't want to complicate the issue too much because that stuff is not really discussed
Got
with
you.
a lot of detail. There's just some. Then at the same time, a person can go insane. We have to treat that as the person that uh in the fiqh as a for at this stage as a person that is intoxicated by alcohol. That person that person did that to themselves. They're still responsible. There's moral implications in this stuff. If somebody smokes dust and they go kill somebody, you know, are they responsible, not responsible? We have to hold them accountable. But then after the damage is done of the dust, you know, whatever the consequences of the accountability, that's a different discussion. But there has to be some accountability. Now, when the person gets to the point where they're starting to see pink leprechauns, and that's like a permanent state. Some of us we're very familiar with people that have been dusted and they just don't come back from that.
Right.
So at that point in time, can you after at that point in time, can you hold them responsible for Salah? They're burnt out. But a person may smoke dust, kill somebody, come off the high, and then they come back to some state of possession of intellect. Maybe slightly altered because they did brain damage, but it's not like the person that completely zoned out and now they are like in a permanent state of seeing leprechauns and all that type of stuff. You get what I'm saying?
Right. I got you.
But here's not going into all that detail, right? But the idea of ahliya, التام والناقص. Ahliya means the capacity, intellectual capacity and moral capacity, that type of stuff. So there's that which is considered complete and whole, and that which is considered deficient. But we have to account for that. We have to account for these. Going back to the example of the dusted person, we have to account for that because that's what's in the environment. You know what I'm saying? And when we look at the difference between the conditions of obligation, the conditions of what makes it saw sound, like here, like when you go down here, this type of discussion, you start asking what's the difference between the conditions of obligation, the conditions of salah being sound. Well, these things up here, they're out of our hand for the most part. I said this one gets iffy Islam because there's a choice to come into Islam. But the rest of them, like we're not responsible for making puberty happen. Although we know that due to chemical changes in the food, children are becoming pubescent at an earlier age. But still, we're
Right.
not here. These conditions are there to just tell us salah is an obligation. If they're met, if a person is Muslim, if they're pubescent, if they're possessive of intellect, with the details that we mentioned, conscious and of sound mind, if the person is not on their menstrual cycle and the time of the salah kicked in, it is now the person is obligated to pray. That's the idea there. But if you want to know these conditions that make the salah obligatory, if you want to know what the difference is between them and the conditions that make the salah sound, then you go back to that point that we mentioned that for the most part these things are not acquired. Like you can't do it, you can't achieve this by work, by action. It's not of your own doing, with the exception of Islam. You can't make yourself be pubescent. You can't make yourself be possessed of intellect. You know what I'm saying? That's something that if it's gone for the most part is out of your hands. You're not required to become pubescent. You know what I'm saying? In order for salah to be an obligation on you. It's just part of the flow of life. Similar to rain, are you obligated to make it rain? It's part of the flow of life. Are you obligated to change seasons? Are you obligated to get gray hair? No, it happens. It's part of the life flow, life cycle. But when you get gray hair, then now you're in the stage of going to be a senior citizen. Do you make yourself become a senior citizen? No, you grow into that. You know what I'm saying? Without your doing. The same thing with these things. You know, these things are out of our hands. They happen. There's details to this stuff, but that there's no point in going to the details without the framework. That's the worst thing that we can do in the study of fiqh. We have to be able to conceptualize the issue without going into details so that the framework can be in our mind, right? So we're trying to conceptualize what is the condition of obligation, shart al-wujub. What is a condition of obligation? Well, condition of obligation are those things which have to be in place, and once they're in place, they obligate us to pray. That's one. Second, the question comes up, do we have to make sure those things are in place? No, that's out of our hands. We're not obligated to them. So if any of these things, which constitutes a condition that's obligatory to be met, if any of those things is missing, then you're not obligated to pray. If you're not a Muslim, for the most part, you're not obligated to pray. Although we know there's another opinion behind that, but just keep it simple for right now. If you're not a Muslim, if you're not puberty, you did not reach the stage of puberty, if you don't possess intellect, if if you're on your menstrual cycle or you're doing postpartum bleeding, if the time of salah didn't come in, any of those things, if those things are the reality, then salah is not an obligation on you. Right now, there's no salah that's an obligation due to the time not being in. We're not we're not close to the time of dhuhr. Neither are we close to the time of fajr. So those salah are not an obligation on us. A woman that hit her menstrual cycle, she can no longer pray, she can no longer fast. So neither fasting Ramadan in that time period is an obligation for her. Neither is praying the salah. Now there's a detail to that, but I don't want to get into that, which is she has to make up the fast. I mean the yeah, she has to make up the fast later on. But in that time period, it's not a because of something that's out of her hands. Something that is out of her hand, which is the menstrual cycle, or which is the postpartum bleeding after she has a child. If a person goes insane or if a person is asleep, the salah, how can they be obligated to pray the salah? They're not conscious. So they have to be conscious. If a person is not puberty, which in this case, you're talking about both males and females. Maturity is not a good translation. Some things here he didn't translate at the level that we would like maturity and reason and so on and so forth. He simplified it though. He made it simple, but the detail that's necessary is not there. So I want to stop because it's a lot. Even though it seems like a little, it's a lot. Any questions on any of these 5 points which are considered to be shurutul wujub or the conditions of obligation? There's details to each one of these things, but for right now, I'm just asking, are there any questions with regard to what we covered?
Mm-mm.
No.
What
No, I did a
what
good.
about the framework that we covered prior to?
No.
I have questions on the framework, but you said not to ask them right now because I'm looking at the neither with
You
the
can
words
ask
and the
right. You can
actions.
ask right now.
But
Um,
well, what would consider the neither words and actions? Like example.
let me go back here. Hold on 1 second. So mostly we covered this issue like the intention for the salah itself, like facing the qibla, like the time for the salah. Those 3 things. Those 3 things are part of the salah.
You said facing Qibla, time, and what was the third thing?
Intentions.
Okay. Jazakallah.
Yeah, and the place of prayer, al-buqa. Those things, those 4 things are considered to be not from the actions or not from the words of the salah, which I prefer this style of teaching fiqh I prefer like this kind of out of the box, like we classify things and the I think it creates a framework in a person's mind. This is purely educational talk at this point. Things that have to do with teaching, pedagogy. What it does is it creates a the framework in a person's mind. Then you're able to know how to determine whether the action is sound or unsound. This type of, even though this is a small text, but this is the type of text just like Qadi Iyad's book, the Qawaid, right, which is translated and is only dealing with the five pillars, not with a lot of detail, but the framework is pretty amazing. Those books, what they do is they help you to conceptualize. It helps you to map out the action. So once you map out the action, then you're thinking more so along the lines of a mufti to be able to determine the action sound or unsound. Whereas other books, they tell you things, but you don't really have a map. Like you can't really map it out. And if you can't map it out, and if you just stuck on details without kind of knowing how things interrelate with one another or how to classify things overall, then it's very hard to have the mufti mindset. There's a book in Hanafi fiqh that's written in question and answer form. So it looks like, oh, this is a kid's book because it's question and answer. But no, if you think about it, think about the class. If you have something that you don't know, you ask a question and then you get an answer. You you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So then that's the concept of the mufti, that you go to a person that has knowledge of Islam, that's qualified to give fatwa. You ask them a question and they give you an answer. So the end goal is really to know how to ask the question and know how to give the answer, right? So this type of book, if it builds your mind in that way, although it's simple, because it's forcing you to map it out. It forces, like when they say that when he